Carson Hocevar just pulled off one of the most unexpected wins of the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season, taking the checkered flag at Talladega Superspeedway in his 91st career Cup start. But if you watched that race and thought the result was the biggest story coming out of Alabama, you were only seeing half the picture. Because before a single lap was even turned on Sunday, NASCAR had already lit a fuse that split the garage right down the middle. A rule change that some people called smart and necessary, and others, including a two-time Cup Series champion, called a complete waste of time. So let's go back to the beginning and walk through everything, because this story has layers, and every single one of them. To understand why NASCAR made changes for Talladega, you first have to understand what has been happening at Superspeedways 2022 when the next-gen car made its debut. Fuel saving, the strategy of drivers running at significantly less than full throttle to conserve gas and reduce the need for green flag pit stops, became a fixture at Daytona International Speedway and Talladega Superspeedway almost immediately with a new car. The 2026 Daytona 500 made it impossible to ignore any longer. Cars were running at half throttle, riding single file in long packs, preserving fuel rather than racing. The spectacle that fans expected from the biggest superspeedways in the country had been replaced by a slow-motion chess match that nobody in the stands or at home actually wanted. John Probst, NASCAR's executive vice president and chief racing development officer, addressed it directly. "Listen, we talk to our fans every week," he said on the latest episode of the Hauler Talk podcast. So we hear what they're saying. There's certainly a lot of feedback from the fans that don't always like to see some of the three-wide fuel saving that happens mostly at Talladega and Daytona. So NASCAR went to work. Probst laid out how the sanctioning body approached the problem by dividing potential solutions into two categories. The first was sporting-related changes, things like rules around pit stops or stage lengths. The second was the technical bucket, which would mean changes to the car itself, spoiler adjustments, power levels, and similar modification. As we went through all of our options, Probst said there is a little bit of reluctance to just make wholesale changes to any of the technical stuff in the middle of the season for fear of the unintended consequences. With mid-season technical changes off the table, NASCAR turned to the sporting side of the equation, and the decision they landed on was one of the most significant structural changes to a race format in recent memory. In previous years, Talladega's stage structure broke the 188-lap race rough the third. In both races in 2025, Stage 1 ended at lap 60, Stage 2 at lap 120, and the final stage ran the remaining. It was a format fans and teams had grown accustomed, and it was also a format that had become completely predictable in terms of strategy. For the 2026 Jack Links 500, NASCAR flipped that entirely. Stage 1 was extended all the way to lap 98 laps, while Stage 2 would end at lap 143, just 45 laps later. The final stage would then run the remaining 45 laps to the lap 188. The original stage specifications have been set at 60-120-180. Now, they were 98-143-1. If you look at generally how a lot of our speedways were laid out, it was a short stage, and then a long stage to the end, Probst explained. Going into Talladega, we're going to flip that and adjust the lengths of the final two stages such that we're confident that the last two stages are short enough to be made without a full stop. The logic was straightforward. With 45 laps per stage in the second half of this, short enough that a full tank could cover the distance without stopping, teams would no longer need to save fuel at closing. The end of the race, in theory, would be a full throttle sprint. Stage 1, however, was now a different animal entirely, and that's where things got complicated. Probst acknowledged that the long opening stage would create strategic unpredictability. It could be interesting as well in that first stage, the length of it, if there's some that try to do it on one stop versus some that try to do it on two, he said. We think that if there are some that try to do it on two, they may drag the group that try to do it on one along with them to where they won't be able to do it in one. So it's got the potential there for some pretty interesting strategy. One additional structural note. With the new stage lengths, the halfway point of the race moved to lap 94 under the NASCAR rule book, which determines when a race becomes official. Not everyone inside the NASCAR garage accepted this change with open arms. Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion and one of the most outspoken drivers in the sport, made his position very clear heading to race. He did not believe the stage length changes would make any meaningful difference. Busch's argument came down to one fundamental reality about how NASCAR teams operate. Crew chiefs are always looking for ways to save fuel and always try and put in the least amount possible during pit stop. That mentality, Busch argued, does not disappear just because the stages are short. If anything, it adapts. He went even further when talking about the passing problem at Talladega specific. According to Busch, the only real way to gain positions at the track is during pit stops by short filling, taking less fuel than competitors to exit pit road fast and jump other cars still on track. When the field is running 3 wide and managing throttle, there is nowhere to go, no momentum building, no lanes opening. Even when the pack goes 3 wide, it tends to lock into the bottom groove, making meaningful position changes extremely difficult. From his perspective, this was never a stage length problem. It was a racing dynamics problem. Front stretch columnist Steven Stumps made a similarly sharp pre-race argument. His position was that NASCAR stage changes for the weekend, while clever, would be exploited by the teams once again. The reason, he argued, was rooted in something NASCAR had not accounted for. NASCAR assumes that the teams will act in good faith and pack the cars with enough fuel under the stage cautions to run 45 laps. But the teams aren't going to pack their cars with at least 45 laps. They're going to pack them with less. The reasoning behind that, Stump explained, is that track position is king at Talladega. If taking a lighter fuel load gets a team out of the pits faster and into a better position on track, they will do it. And if they come up short on fuel, all they need to do is manage throttle and slow the pace down just enough to stretch the tank. The new stage structure had, in Stump's view, simply moved the problem rather than eliminate. Crew chiefs speaking to the media before the race reinforced just how uncertain everyone was about how Sunday would unfold. Richard Boswell, crew chief for Austin Dillon's number 3 Richard Childress Racing Chevrolet, captured the mood perfect. I think we were talking about it this week. Like, what do we think? Are guys going to run it like a road course? Are they going to run it out to try and score stage points? 50% think it's this way, and 50% think it's this way. So I think it could be very, very split. Luke Lambert, crew chief for Carson Hocevar's number 77 Spire Motorsports Chevrolet, put it this way. The way the stages are set up, the first stage has put in a potentially new style of fuel saving that we haven't really seen before, but it really depends on what the mass is. It's created some options for all the teams, so it'll be interesting to see how people play it. When the Jack Links 500 got underway on Sunday, April 26th, the evidence began coming in almost immediate. Stage 1, covering those 98 laps, delivered something that recent superspeedway races had struggled to produce. The pack broke into several smaller groups rather than one massive freight train, and those smaller packs raced considerably more efficiently. Teams genuinely split on strategy. Some pushed harder early. Others managed their throttle. The field raced to the stage, and despite fuel concerns still being present, which was itself a change from what fans had seen, there was still some fuel saving in stage 1, but the dynamic was different and the racing reflected. The skeptics were not entirely wrong. Teams did manage, but the outcome in terms of on-track action was noticeably better than the 2026 Daytona 500. Then stage 2 began with a catastrophe. A 26-car pileup reshuffled the entire field and altered the race's trajectory in instance. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was involved in triggering the late race caution as well, when he turned Hocevar just enough to make contact with Eric Jones, setting up a 3-lap run to the finish. Talladega, as it so often does, reminded everyone that no strategy or rule change can fully control what happened at track. The Toyota camp, which had dominated the 2026 season with 7 wins in the first 9 races, had a rough afternoon. The points leader, Tyler Reddick, salvaged a 14th place finish, but 6 Toyotas wound up 22nd. It was the kind of Talladega day that happens, and, as with most things at that track, carried no predictive value beyond the afternoon itself. When the final 45-lap stage got underway, it delivered exactly what NASCAR had promised. The closing segment was a full-throttle sprint. No fuel-saving parade. No half-throttle, 3-wide stalling. Hocevar worked his way into position against Chris Buescher in the closing laps, and the two of them raced hard with just a handful of laps remaining. The caution flew after Stenhouse's contact with Jones, setting up that 3-lap shootout. At the critical moment, Hocevar had the option to block Buescher, and he chose not to. That decision, showing remarkable composure for a driver known for aggressive racing, won in the race. The Jack Links 500 is Hocevar's first career Cup Series win in his 91st start and the second Cup victory for Spire Motors. He was also the third first-time winner at Talladega that weekend, joining Andy Jankowiak, Yarcia, and Corey Day O'Reilly Series. After taking the checkered flag, Hocevar climbed onto the windowsill of his moving car, waving to the crowd without a helmet as he rolled down the front stretch at speed. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell told Hocevar immediately after the race he was good with it, though the question of whether that remains the official position after further review is very much open. So did NASCAR's gamble pay off? The answer is genuinely mixed, and that mix is important to understand. The final two stages delivered the full-throttle racing NASCAR had promised. That is a concrete result. The closing portion of the race was competitive and legitimate. Strategy was more diverse than anything fans had seen at a recent superspeedway event. Smaller packs raced against each other in a way that felt more like actual competition. And the race produced a first-time winner from a smaller team in a memorable finish. But the skeptics were not wrong. Fuel saving did not disappear. It moved into stage one. The big one still happened because it almost always does at Talladega. Teams did find ways to manage fuel in the opening stage, validating the core concern that crew chiefs would adapt to whatever structure NASCAR puts in front of them. The debate that emerged after the checkered flag centered on two potential paths forward. First, should NASCAR eliminate stage cautions at superspeedways entirely? The argument, made compellingly by several analysts, is that without stage cautions forcing the entire field to bunch back together, the massive single-pack formation that creates both fuel-saving opportunities and catastrophic wrecks will be broken up naturally. Stage points could still be awarded without throwing caution. Second, should NASCAR mandate four-tire pit stops at superspeedways, a rule being considered for 2027? A four-tire stop would force teams to take on more fuel, making it virtually impossible to short fill for track position. The trade-off is that it would hurt smaller, slower pit crews and potentially remove one of the few competitive equalizers. NASCAR already has its next step plan. A preseason Thunder Test session at Daytona International Speedway is scheduled for January, before the Rolex 24 set for January 30th to 31st, 2027. Probst confirmed that NASCAR plans to test some different power levels and spoilers, and maybe some other car type to further address the fuel-saving issue. Tyler Reddick extended his championship lead to 110 points over Denny Hamlin, who took an early pit road penalty that left him a lap down for most of the afternoon and locked out of stage. Ryan Blaney sits third, 140 points behind Reddick. Chase Elliott moved up to fourth. Ty Gibbs dropped to fifth after finishing 30th. Kyle Larson slipped to sixth following his early exit in the lap 1:15 crash. Chris Buescher and Carson Hocevar both jumped 4 spots into the top 10 after their strong finishes. On the negative side, William Byron dropped 4 spots to 11th after finishing 35th, a direct victim of the big one. At the Chase cut line, Austin Cindric currently holds the 16th and final playoff spot by just 4 points over Chase Briscoe, a margin thin enough that every single race from here matters. The NASCAR Cup Series moves to Texas Motor Speedway on May 3rd at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on FS1 for the Worth 400. Kyle Busch leads all active drivers with 4 Texans. Denny Hamlin has 3. Tyler Reddick comes in with the best average finish at the track in the series at 11.0, making him the driver. William Byron and Eric Jones also carry strong average finishes at Texas and will be looking to recover from disappointing Talladega outing. The broader question hanging over all of it, was Talladega 2026 a sign that NASCAR can fix superspeedway racing with smart structural tweaks? Or was it a one-weekend adjustment that teams will have fully figured out by the time October's return to the track arrives? The preseason Thunder Test in January will provide the real answer. Until then, the sport moves forward with one new winner, a widening points gap at the top, and a fuel-saving problem that is smaller than it was last week, but nowhere close to solved.